Wealth can silence worlds, but it couldn't command a single nerve to fire in her daughter's body. Lady Zoraya Valerius, whose name could crumble stock markets on a dozen star systems, possessed everything but a cure. She had purchased the Ethelgard Institute, a moon-sized hospital floating in the quiet void, and filled it with the galaxy's finest minds. They brought quantum mechanics, genetic recoding, and nanite swarms. They all failed. Then came the human, a doctor with no galactic prestige, no exotic technology, just a strange theory about sound. He was her last, desperate, pathetic hope. She was ready to dismiss him, to crush his career for daring to waste her time. But she never got the chance. Because in the middle of a sterile, opulent dining hall, a miracle born of human stubbornness was about to make the richest woman in the sector forget how to hold a plate. The Ethelgard Institute was less a hospital and more a monument to sterile opulence. Carved from a rare pearlescent asteroid, it orbited the gas giant Cyrilia, its inner chambers bathed in the soft, refracted light of the planet's turquoise rings. Corridors of polished obsidian flowed like frozen rivers, silent save for the whisper of grav lifts and the deferential hum of medical droids. It was the most expensive place in the known galaxy to be told there was no hope. For its owner, Lady Zoraya Valerius, every gleaming surface was a mockery. Zoraya stood before the panoramic window of the primary observation suite, her reflection a severe, elegant silhouette against the swirling cosmic ballet outside. She was Xylosian, a species whose angular features and silver-sheened skin were synonymous with wealth and ruthless ambition. Her family had cornered the market on quantium ore for 5 generations, building an empire that spanned the Orion arm. She could buy armies, planets, politicians. The one thing her trillions of credits couldn't purchase was a functioning spine for her daughter. On the bio-bed in the center of the room, Lyra Valerius lay still. At 17, standard years, she should have been entering her debut season a whirlwind of galas and political introductions. Instead, her world was the pressurized gel of the bed, her only movement, the slow drift of her dark hair in the weak convection currents of the air recyclers. Her eyes, the same piercing violet as her mother's, were open and sharp, darting across the holographic displays that were her only connection to the outside world. Synaptic decay syndrome, a uniquely Xylosian affliction, as rare as it was catastrophic. It began in the lower brainstem, a slow, insidious unraveling of the neural pathways. The mind remained a pristine, brilliant diamond, trapped within a prison of flesh that no longer listened. The best Xylosian geneticists had sequenced her genome 1,000 times. The most advanced Cathar cyberneticists had proposed replacing her entire nervous system with fiber-optic relays. She had refused. Lyra wanted to feel the sun on her skin, not simulate it through a processor. "Report," Zoraya commanded, without turning. Her voice was low, accustomed to being obeyed without question. A floating medical droid, a chrome orb named Unit 734, shimmered into existence beside her. "Status of subject Lyra Valerius remains unchanged, my lady. Motor function is null. Cognitive activity is high. She is currently reviewing pre-collapse Terran ballet. Swan Lake, I believe." Zoraya's jaw tightened. Ballet. Lyra's obsession. Before the illness had taken hold, she had been a prodigy of Xylosian kinetic arts, a fluid, gravity-defying dance form. Now she could only watch long-dead humans perform their primitive, beautiful art. The irony was a physical pain in Zoraya's chest. "The new consultant has arrived." Unit 734 added its tone perfectly neutral. "He is waiting in the antechamber." Zoraya finally turned her gaze, sweeping over her daughter with a flicker of pain so profound it was almost violent. Another one, Unit 734, remind Director Vask what I said about wasting my time with charlatans and fringe theorists. Director Vask felt this candidate's approach was novel, the droid replied. He is not a geneticist or a cyberneticist. He is a human. A Dr. Marcus Thorne. Human. Zoraya's lip curled in disdain. A brash, short-lived species from a chaotic little world in a forgotten sector. They were known for their illogical art and their baffling persistence, but hardly for medical breakthroughs. His specialty, neuroacoustic resonance, the droid stated. Zoraya laughed a sharp, bitter sound. Sound waves. He plans to cure a degenerative neurological condition with sound waves. By the founders, Vask has finally lost his mind. Send him away. Wire his fee to his home institution and attach a cease and desist order for ever contacting us again. Mother. The word was not spoken aloud. It shimmered into existence on a holographic pane next to Zoraya's head, typed by Lyra, using a direct neural interface that read her intentions. Zoraya's expression softened instantly. She glided to the bedside, her cold demeanor melting away to reveal the raw grief beneath. Lyra, my love, we are not entertaining this foolishness. A human musician masquerading as a doctor. Please, the text appeared. Let him try. What is there to lose? Everything. Her hope, the fragile shell she had built around her heart, could not withstand another crack. Every failed attempt, every new genius who walked away shaking his head, chipped away at her. But she could deny her daughter nothing. Very well, she sighed, her voice heavy with resignation. Unit 734 show Dr. Thorne in. But you will remain and record everything. I want a full accounting of this failure for Director Vask's termination review. The antechamber door slid open with a hiss. Dr. Marcus Thorne was not what Zoraya had expected. She had pictured a flashy, overconfident man, perhaps with the slick charm of a galactic salesman. The man who entered was of average height, with tired eyes, and a rumpled coat that looked at least a decade out of fashion. He carried a battered-looking case made of some dull grey alloy. He looked less like a pioneering scientist and more like a weary public defender. He stopped a respectful distance away, his eyes not on the formidable Lady Valerius, but on the girl in the bed. He gave a small, gentle smile. Lyra, he said, his voice surprisingly warm. I'm Marcus. Zoraya stepped forward, a shield of ice and authority. You are Dr. Thorne. You will address my daughter as Miss Valerius, and you will address me as Lady Valerius. You have 15 minutes to explain why I should not have you ejected from the nearest airlock for this monumental waste of my time. Marcus finally met her gaze. There was no fear in his eyes, only a quiet, resolute calm that she found intensely irritating. Lady Valerius, he began, inclining his head slightly. The Zolosian approach, and indeed most advanced medical theory, views the body as a machine. A biological engine. If a part is broken, you replace it. If the code is corrupt, you rewrite it. It's logical, it's efficient, and in this case it's wrong. He set his case down and opened it. Inside, nestled in soft foam, was not a glittering array of hyposprays or laser scalpels, but a complex series of tuning forks, crystalline emitters, and a central holographic projector. It looked like an antique musical instrument. Synaptic decay isn't a broken component. Marcus continued, his fingers brushing over a crystal rod. It's a song played out of tune. The resonant frequency of the neural pathways has drifted. The signals are still being sent from the brain, but the nerves are no longer tuned to receive them. They can't hear the commands. Preposterous, Zoria scoffed. Our biomonitors show a complete cessation of signal transmission at the C2 vertebra. There is no drift. There is silence. Your monitors are designed to detect a specific amplitude of bioelectric signal, Marcus countered smoothly. They're listening for a shout, and they're missing the whisper. I don't intend to shout. I intend to help Lyra's body remember its own song. I'm not a mechanic, Lady Valerius. I'm a tuner. He looked at Lyra, who was watching him with an intensity that made Zoraya's breath catch. What do you dream of, Lyra? Marcus asked her. His tone soft. The text appeared. Dancing. Marcus nodded a sad smile, touching his lips. I thought so. The desire for movement, for grace, is one of the deepest instincts we have. It's a rhythm that starts in the soul. That's the song we're going to find. Zoria watched him, her skepticism warring with the desperate, traitorous flicker of hope Lyra's plea had ignited. He was either a madman or a genius. In her experience, the line between the two was often invisible, and crossing it was ruinously expensive. You may begin, Doctor, she said, her voice like chipping ice. But be warned, I do not suffer fools, and my disappointment is a currency you cannot afford to earn. Marcus Thorne did not begin with a grand pronouncement or a dramatic flourish. His process was one of quiet, meticulous preparation that grated on Zoraya's nerves. He spent the first 3 days doing what her legion of high-priced specialists had already done, but with an unsettlingly analog focus. He requested Lyra's complete medical history, not just the genetic sequencing and neural scans, but archaic records of her childhood illnesses, her growth charts, even holovids of her dancing as a young girl. He sat for hours watching the holovids on a simple data slate, his brow furrowed in concentration. He wasn't just observing, he was mapping. He traced the lines of her movements, the arcs of her limbs, the precise, fluid rhythm of her Xylosian kinetic art. Zoria watched him from the observation deck, a growing sense of impatient fury building within her. What is he doing? She demanded of Unit 734. He is being paid a fortune per cycle to watch home movies. He claims he is establishing a baseline rhythm, my lady, the droid replied. He is attempting to codify the unique cadence of her personal motor functions before the onset of the syndrome. Codify a cadence. He sounds like a poet, not a physician. This is a farce. On the 4th day, Marcus finally began the treatment. He placed small crystalline nodes on Lyra's skin, not at major nerve junctions, as a cyberneticist would, but at seemingly random points on her forehead, her sternum, her palms, and the soles of her feet. These were connected by hair-thin filaments to the strange device from his case. He dimmed the suite's ambient lighting, leaving only the soft glow of the bio-monitors and the turquoise light from the planet outside. He didn't consult complex readouts or AI-driven diagnostic tools. Instead, he closed his eyes, placing his fingertips on one of the larger tuning forks in his device. A low hum filled the room. It was barely audible, a subsonic vibration that seemed to exist more in the bones than in the ears. It was unlike any medical sound Zoria had ever heard. It wasn't the sterile beep of a monitor or the aggressive whine of a diagnostic scanner. It was a deep, organic tone, almost a living thing. He began to work, adjusting dials with microscopic precision. The hum shifted in pitch, weaving through a series of complex frequencies. A holographic display bloomed above the device, but it didn't show medical data. It showed waveforms, intricate overlapping sine curves of light that pulsed in time with the sound. What you are seeing, Marcus explained, his eyes still closed in concentration, is the body's bioacoustic field. Every living cell vibrates. Every organ system has its own resonant frequency. When they are all in harmony, you have health. When one falls out of tune, you have disease. He made another adjustment. A new, higher frequency joined the first, a soft, ethereal chime. Lyra's nervous system has, for lack of a better term, forgotten its note. It's been overwhelmed by a dissonant frequency, the syndrome, that has effectively muted its natural vibration. I am not attacking the syndrome. That would be like trying to silence a hurricane. Instead, I'm reintroducing her body's original healthy frequency. I'm giving her nerves a pitch to tune to. On the main biomonitor, Lyra's vital signs remained stable. Her neural activity showed no change. Her muscle response was flat. Zoraya crossed her arms, a grim sense of vindication settling over her. He was failing, just as she knew he would. It was an elegant, elaborate, and utterly useless failure. For weeks, this became their routine. Marcus would arrive, greet Lyra with a quiet warmth that Zoraya found unnerving, and begin the sessions. He spoke to Lyra throughout, not with the condescending tone of a doctor to a patient, but as a collaborator. "We are looking for the frequency of your pirouette." "Lyra," he would murmur, his hands deftly adjusting his instrument. "The moment of perfect balance. Feel it in your memory." Lyra in turn began to interact with the process. Using her neural interface, she would project images for him, a memory of sunlight on water, the feel of silk, the smell of a Zazelosian moon blossom. She was giving him sensory data, emotional data, things that no diagnostic machine could ever quantify. Marcus would nod, study the images, and then translate them into sound. He was composing a symphony for a single patient, a piece of music designed to awaken her nerves. Zoraya saw it as a dangerous delusion. The human was giving her daughter false hope, wrapping his failure in a cloak of mystical nonsense. She began compiling her report for Director Vask's dismissal, detailing every useless session, every nonsensical theory. One afternoon, about a month into the treatment, Zoraya entered the suite to find Marcus and Lyra engaged in a new activity. He had linked Lyra's neural interface to his waveform generator. The images she thought of now directly influenced the holographic display of Sine curves. "Show me a leap," Lyra Marcus said, gently. In Lyra's mind, she was on the stage of the Imperial Conservatory on Xylos. The anti-gravity generators were humming, and she launched herself into the air, a perfect grand jeté. On the display, the waveforms spiked a complex, soaring arc of light and color. Good Marcus breathed. Now the landing, the control, the absorption of energy. The waveforms on the display softened, cascading downwards in a gentle, controlled pattern. He is connecting with her Unit 734, observed from its position near Zoraya. His methodology appears to be building a novel biofeedback loop between cognitive intent and external sensory stimulation. "He is playing a video game with my daughter," Zoraya snapped. "This is not medicine. It is a distraction." But even as she said it, she couldn't deny the change in Lyra. A light had returned to her eyes. The deep, weary resignation that had taken root there was being replaced by something else, focus engagement, even a glimmer of fragile joy. She was no longer a passive patient being acted upon by machines. She was an active participant in her own potential recovery. That evening, Zoraya confronted Marcus in the corridor outside Lyra's suite. "Dr. Thorne," she said, her voice sharp, "your contract is for medical treatment, not for providing entertainment. What precisely is the clinical value of this light show you are conducting?" Marcus looked tired, but his gaze was steady. "The clinical value, Lady Valerius, is in rebuilding the bridge between intention and action. For years, your daughter's mind has sent commands that have gone unanswered. The pathway is broken. Imagine shouting into a canyon and never hearing an echo. Eventually, you stop shouting. Lyra's brain is starting to give up. I'm creating a new form of echo. When she thinks of a leap, she sees a leap. It's a sensory substitution, reinforcing the neural command, keeping the pathway primed, and active. Primed for what a miracle, Zoraya scoffed. For a response, Marcus said simply, "We are teaching her body to listen for the music again. It's a slow process. It takes patience. Patience is a luxury I have run out of," Zoraya said, turning to leave. "My lawyers will be reviewing your contract. I suggest you find a tangible result, and soon." She swept away, leaving Marcus standing alone in the obsidian corridor. She didn't see the look on his face, not of fear or defeat, but of profound, unyielding stubbornness. He was a human, and humans had a history of refusing to accept the inevitable. He believed in his illogical, unquantifiable theory with a fervor that bordered on religious. And in the gilded, silent cage of the Ethelgard Institute, his quiet faith was the most anomalous and dangerous variable of all. The first sign was so small it was almost nothing. It happened during the 6th week. Marcus was running a complex harmonic sequence, attempting to map the frequencies of the peripheral nervous system in Lyra's left hand. The room was filled with a sound like layered crystal bells. Lyra was focused on a memory gripping the cool, smooth practice bar in her old dance studio. Her mental projection was so clear, so detailed, that Marcus could almost feel the polished wood himself. On the biomonitor, a line that had been flat for 3 years suddenly jumped, a tiny jagged spike in the myoelectric readout for her index finger. It lasted less than a millisecond before flatlining again. Unit 734 registered it instantly. Anomaly detected. Transient muscle fiber contraction in the left index finger. Reading classified as statistical noise, likely a sensor malfunction. Zoraya, watching from her customary position by the window, barely glanced at the screen. Statistical noise. She had seen thousands of such flickers over the years. False positives, ghost signals, the death throes of a dying system. But Marcus went rigid. His eyes snapped open and locked onto the monitor, then onto Lyra's hand. He didn't see noise. He saw a signal. It wasn't a malfunction. He said, his voice a low, excited whisper. "Lyra, do that again. Focus." The exact same memory. The pressure of the wood, the temperature, the grain beneath your fingertips. The text on Lyra's display flashed. "I didn't do anything." "Yes, you did," Marcus insisted, leaning closer to his device. Your brain shouted, and for the first time, a single nerve whispered back. "Let's try again." He adjusted the frequency a minute shift of less than 1/100th of a hertz. The tone of the bells in the room became infinitesimally sharper, clearer. "Now, Lyra. Focus." She concentrated, her cognitive output spiking on the monitor. They all watched her hand lying pale and motionless on the biobed. Nothing. The myoelectric line remained stubbornly, painfully flat. Zoraya let out a sigh, a mixture of disappointment and weary, "I told you so." "Doctor, do not excite my daughter with fantasies based on faulty equipment." It wasn't the equipment, Marcus said, his eyes still glued to the screen. He was running a diagnostic replay, isolating the millisecond of the event. "Look." He projected the data onto a larger hollow screen. The energy signature of the spike doesn't match the profile of a random misfire. A random signal is chaotic. This has form. It's a coherent response, just incredibly faint. He brought up another set of data, a complex equation that shimmered in the air. "This is the foundational formula for bioresonance," he explained more to himself than to Zoraya. "The resonant frequency is a function of the system's inductance and its biological capacitance. The syndrome has collapsed the capacitance, throwing the entire equation out of balance. For that 1 millisecond, we found the right frequency to momentarily restore it. We found the note." Zoraya stared at the formula. It was elegant, simplistic, and utterly irrelevant. You can show me all the quaint, archaic mathematics you wish, Doctor. It changes nothing. A twitch is not a cure. No, Marcus agreed, his focus absolute. It's a foothold. From that day on, the nature of the sessions changed. They were no longer just searching for a frequency. They were hunting it. Marcus and Lyra worked as a team. He would generate a harmonic field, and she would focus her intent trying to replicate the mental state that had produced the first twitch. It was grueling, frustrating work. Days would pass with no results, leaving Lyra exhausted and despondent, the text on her screen growing slower, duller. During these low points, Marcus would switch tactics. He wouldn't talk about medicine or neurology. He would tell her stories about Earth. He described oceans vast and chaotic, so different from the controlled aquatic parks on Xylos. He described forests where trillions of organisms competed and cooperated in a beautiful, messy, unplannable dance of life. He talked about human art music and the stubborn, illogical drive to create beauty in the face of entropy. "Your science is so clean, Lady Valerius," he said to Zoraya one evening after a particularly difficult day. "You seek to eliminate variables to create perfect closed systems. Human biology isn't like that. It's messy, redundant, and adaptive. It learns. We're not just trying to repair a wire, we're trying to convince a complex ecosystem to grow in a new direction." Zoria found his philosophies as irritating as his methods, yet she couldn't bring herself to terminate the contract. That single millisecond-long spike had planted a splinter of possibility in her mind, and it was beginning to fester. The second sign came 2 weeks after the first. They were working on the same memory the dance bar. Suddenly the index finger on Lyra's left hand, the very same one, curled inward, a slow, deliberate, and undeniable motion. It stayed curled for a full second before relaxing. This time there was no question of a sensor malfunction. Zoraya saw it with her own eyes. She took a sharp, involuntary step forward, her hand flying to her mouth. Unit 734's optical sensor swiveled to focus on the finger, emitting a series of rapid clicks. Confirmed. Voluntary motor function registered. Signal strength is 0.02% of baseline, but coherent and sustained. On the holographic display, Lyra's words appeared frantic and blazing with light. "I felt that. Mother, I felt it. It was mine." Marcus sank into his chair, wiping a sheen of sweat from his brow. He looked not triumphant, but profoundly relieved, as if a mountain's weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "The foothold is secure," he whispered. "Now we climb." Progress after that was agonizingly slow, but it was tangible. A twitch became a flex became a weak, trembling grip. They moved from her hand to her wrist, then her forearm. Each new area was a battle requiring Marcus to find its unique, resonant frequency, and for Lyra to build the mental discipline to use it. It was like she was learning to use her own body from scratch, one muscle group at a time. Zoraya's attitude began to shift from open hostility to a tense, guarded observation. She stopped compiling her dismissal report. She started asking Marcus questions, sharp, intelligent questions about his theories, his calculations, the mechanics of his device. She was a businesswoman. She understood systems. And while she didn't understand the art of Marcus's method, she was beginning to grasp the underlying science. She was starting to see the pattern in the music. Her hope, long since buried under layers of grief and cynicism, began to stir. It was a terrifying feeling. Hope was a vulnerability she could not afford, a weakness that had brought her nothing but pain. She tried to crush it, to remind herself of the dozens of other miracle cures that had turned to dust. But every day she would watch as Lyra, through sheer force of will, managed to lift her arm a few centimeters from the biobed. She would see the fierce joy on her daughter's face, a joy transmitted through the cold text of a machine, and the icy walls around her heart would melt just a little. The human anomaly was achieving the impossible, and Zoriah Valerius did not know what to do with the terrifying, brilliant, whispered promise of his success. The Ethelgard Institute's grand refectory was a space designed to intimidate. A single vaulted chamber with a ceiling that was a slow-motion hologram of the Cerulean Nebula, it was where visiting dignitaries and top-level staff took their meals. The tables were carved from Jovian obsidian, the cutlery forged from inert silvered alloys. It was a room that radiated power wealth and the cold, hard certainty of science. 3 months into Dr. Thorne's treatment, Zoriah had summoned him to dinner. It was not an invitation. It was a command. She felt a need to reassert the hierarchy. The recent progress had subtly shifted the power dynamic, making her feel less like his employer and more like a supplicant, and she despised the feeling. Lyra was with them, her bio-bed having been discreetly grav-lifted to the head of the long table. She was taking her nourishment intravenously, but she enjoyed being present for the ritual. Zoriah was in a foul mood. That day's progress had been negligible. Lyra had been attempting to coordinate movement in her lower limbs, and the effort had resulted in little more than faint, uncontrolled spasms. The frustration in the room had been a thick, suffocating blanket. "Your progress has stalled," Dr. Zoriah stated, her voice cutting through the soft ambiance of the refectory. She didn't look at him, focusing instead on slicing a piece of exotic Zelosian fruit with surgical precision. Marcus, who was eating a simple Terran vegetable stew, dabbed his mouth with a napkin. "It hasn't stalled, Lady Valerius. It's a plateau. We're dealing with much larger, more complex muscle groups. The amount of neural coherence required is exponentially greater. It's to be expected." "I do not pay for expectations, Doctor. I pay for results," she retorted. "For weeks you have celebrated minuscule twitches and trembles. My daughter can now lift a cup provided it is half full and made of lightweight polymer. Forgive me if I do not break ground on a statue in your honor just yet. You promised a recovery. At this rate, it will take a century." On her display, Lyra's text flashed. "Mother, be fair. Dr. Thorne has done more in 3 months than everyone else did in 3 years. Zoriah ignored it. Her frustration wasn't truly with Marcus. It was with the universe, with the agonizingly slow pace of this fragile, budding hope. She directed her anger at him, because he was the source of it. "Director Vask informs me that your contract is up for its quarterly review." She continued, her tone dangerously soft. "He has recommended a termination. He cites your methods as unorthodox and scientifically unproven, and your results as clinically insignificant." I must admit I am finding it increasingly difficult to argue with his assessment. Marcus set his spoon down and looked at her, his calm demeanor finally showing a crack. "Clinically insignificant, Lady Valerius, your daughter was a prisoner in her own skull. Now she can move her arms. She can operate her own environmental controls. She can interact with the world in a way she hasn't been able to since she was a child. How can you possibly call that insignificant? Because she cannot walk." Zoriah snapped, her control finally breaking. She slammed her fork down on the table, the sharp clang echoing in the cavernous room. "She cannot stand. She cannot dance." "That was the goal, Doctor. Not to move a finger or lift a cup. To dance. Anything less is a failure, a beautifully decorated, emotionally resonant failure." She was breathing heavily, the force of her own outburst shocking her. The few other occupants of the refectory stared at them in silence. Zoriah felt a flush of shame, but it was quickly subsumed by her righteous anger. She had exposed this human's limitations. She had put him back in his place. She turned away from him, her gaze falling on her daughter's biobed, a gesture of finality. She was about to deliver the final crushing blow that his time was up, when a soft sound reached her ears. It was a strange, straining noise, a gasp of effort. Mother. The word was not on a screen. It was a voice, hoarse, weak, distorted from years of disuse. But it was a voice. It was Lyra's voice. Zoraya froze, her entire being going still. It had to be a hallucination, a trick of her overwrought mind. She turned her head slowly, mechanically, toward the biobed. The scene before her defied every law of biology and despair that she had come to accept as truth. The support harness and restraints on the biobed had been disengaged. Lyra, her body trembling violently, with an effort that seemed to shake the very atoms of her being, was pushing herself up. Her arms, thin and pale, but corded with newfound strength, were locked. Her back was straight, and under the fine silk blanket, her legs were bent, her feet planted firmly on the surface of the bed. She was not fully standing, but she was supporting her own weight. Her eyes, wide and brilliant, were locked on her mother's, filled with a terrifying, triumphant fire. Mother, she said again, the word stronger, this time clearer. You dropped your plate. Zoraya looked down. Her hand, which had been holding her porcelain dinner plate, was empty. The plate itself was on the floor, shattered into 100 white fragments against the black obsidian. She hadn't even felt it fall. The universe seemed to contract around that single, impossible image, her daughter, her paralyzed, hopeless daughter, holding herself upright. The hum of the ship, the whispers of the other diners, the nebula on the ceiling, it all vanished. There was only the sound of her own blood roaring in her ears, and the sight of the miracle happening 3 meters away. Marcus was on his feet, his face a mask of stunned, joyous disbelief. He was moving toward Lyra, his hands outstretched, ready to catch her. Lyra. Easy. Easy. But Zoraya didn't move. She couldn't. Her mind, so adept at calculating market futures and hostile takeovers, could not process the data its own eyes were providing. It was impossible. A fluke, a final cruel spasm before the end. But it wasn't. Lyra held the position for a full 10 seconds, a queen claiming her throne before her strength gave out, and she collapsed back onto the bed, gasping for breath, a radiant smile spreading across her face. Silence. A profound, echoing silence filled the refectory. Then Zoria Valerius, the iron-willed matriarch of a galactic empire, did something no one had ever seen her do before. She stumbled. Her knees buckled, and she caught herself on the edge of the table, her perfectly manicured fingers gripping the obsidian so hard her knuckles turned white. The plate was shattered on the floor. Her composure was shattered with it. Her world, which had been a fixed, miserable constant for years, had just been irrevocably, miraculously, and terrifyingly broken. The aftermath of the shattered plate was a blur of frantic activity. Unit 734 and 2 other medical droids swarmed Lyra's biobed, their scanners whirring as they took 1,000 readings. Director Vask, a portly, bureaucratic Xylosian, had appeared almost instantly, his face a comical mixture of shock and terror at having nearly terminated the architect of a miracle. Zoraya, recovering her composure with a speed that was itself formidable, had cleared the refectory and sealed the suite, her mind already shifting from awe to analysis. The initial euphoria was quickly replaced by a storm of questions. The data pouring in from Lyra's scans was in a word impossible. Her neural pathways are regenerating, Director Vask stammered, pointing a trembling finger at a holographic brain scan. The image showed Lyra's spinal column, and where there had once been dark, inactive patches, there were now fine, luminous threads of light. It's not just regeneration, it's restructuring. The new myelin sheaths, they exhibit a crystalline resonance pattern. I've never seen anything like it. Marcus was studying the scans with an intensity that bordered on obsession. It's the resonance, he murmured. We didn't just wake up the old pathways. We gave them a blueprint for a new one. The acoustic frequencies have been embedded into the new cellular structure. Her nerves aren't just healing, they're evolving. They're becoming more efficient, more coherent. Zoraya looked from the scans to her daughter. Lyra was exhausted, but incandescent with joy, flexing her fingers, rotating her ankles, rediscovering a body that had long been a foreign country. The joy was so pure, so overwhelming, that it almost blinded Zoraya to the anomalies. Almost. This crystalline pattern, she said, her voice cutting through the technical chatter. Is it stable? Director Vask hesitated. Theoretically, yes. The energy transmission is flawless. In fact, it's superior to a standard Xylosian nervous system. But the structure is unprecedented. We have no long-term data. A new kind of fear, cold and sharp, pierced through Zoraya's elation. She had spent years mourning a daughter she had lost to a known disease. The terror of losing her again to an unknown cure was a new and exquisite form of torture. Continue the analysis, she ordered. Every molecule. I want to know what this is. For the next 2 days, the Ethelgard Institute's laboratories, the most advanced in the sector, worked at a fever pitch. They analyzed tissue samples, ran quantum simulations, and cross-referenced the data with every known biological database. Marcus worked alongside them, his unorthodox theories suddenly the subject of intense, if bewildered, respect. It was Marcus who found it. He was running a spectral analysis on Lyra's cerebrospinal fluid, looking for the resonant signature of his own acoustic therapy. He found it, but he also found something else. A secondary signature, a faint dissonant hum, buried beneath the clean frequency of the cure. It was alien, synthetic. He isolated the molecule responsible. It was a complex protein chain ingeniously designed to bond to Xylosian nerve endings. On its own, it was inert. But when exposed to the specific bioelectric frequencies of a developing Xylosian adolescent, it would unfold, activating and triggering a cascading collapse of the myelin sheath. It mimicked synaptic decay syndrome so perfectly that no one had ever thought to look for an external agent. Marcus felt a chill crawl down his spine. He ran the analysis again. The results were the same. He sought out Zoraya, immediately finding her in a private observation lounge, watching Lyra take her first unsteady steps with the aid of a grav harness. The sight was so beautiful it was heartbreaking. Lady Valerius Marcus said, his voice grim. We need to talk. Privately. His tone was enough to make Zoraya tear her eyes away from her daughter. She led him into an adjacent office, the door hissing shut behind them, sealing them in silence. What is it? She demanded. Marcus didn't waste words. He projected the molecular analysis into the center of the room. I found the cause of the synaptic decay. Zoraya frowned. We know the cause. It's a genetic flaw, a 1 in a billion mutation. No, Marcus said, his voice flat and hard. It wasn't a mutation. It was a weapon. He highlighted the synthetic protein. This is a designer neurotoxin. It's a poison, Lady Valerius. Sophisticated, patient, perfectly targeted. Someone did this to your daughter. The words hung in the air, dense and heavy as lead. Zoraya stared at the shimmering molecule, her mind refusing to accept the implication. Illness was a tragedy. It was random. It was a battle against nature, But this was an attack. The years of grief, the sterile helplessness, the quiet mourning, it had all been based on a lie. Her daughter wasn't sick. She had been poisoned. The pain of her daughter's paralysis had been a deep, enduring ache, a wound she had learned to live with. This new pain was different. It was sharp, white-hot, and it wasn't grief. It was rage. A pure, cold, galactic-sized fury that burned away every other emotion. The sorrow she had carried for years instantly sublimated into a diamond-hard lust for vengeance. Who she whispered the single word more menacing than a shout. "I don't know," Marcus admitted. "The molecular structure is proprietary, untraceable by conventional means. It would have taken a corporation with immense resources and a complete lack of ethics to develop." Zoria's violet eyes narrowed until they were glittering slits of ice. Her personal and corporate enemies were legion. The Valerius Consortium had crushed hundreds of rivals over the decades. Any one of them could have harbored a grudge deep enough to warrant such a monstrous act. Striking at her through her only child, it was a move of unparalleled cruelty. "They made a mistake," Zoria said, her voice dangerously calm. "They thought my daughter was my weakness, a target, a way to cause me pain." She looked toward the door beyond, which Lyra was learning to walk again. "They failed to understand that she is not my weakness. She is my heart, and a Xylosian will burn down the galaxy to protect their heart." She turned back to Marcus, her gaze piercing. "Doctor, you came here to heal my daughter. You have succeeded beyond my wildest imaginings, but your work is not done. You understand this filth." She gestured to the floating molecule. "You found it. Now you will help me find who made it." Marcus met her gaze without flinching. There was a darkness in his own eyes, while a familiarity with this kind of corporate depravity that Zoria hadn't noticed before. "Gladly," he said. "This kind of science, it leaves a stain. The people who create weapons like this, they don't stop with just one." Zoria strode to her private comms panel, her movements sharp and precise. The grieving mother was gone, replaced by the ruthless CEO. "Unit 734, she commanded. "Lock down the Institute. No incoming or outgoing transmissions without my direct authorization. Access my corporate intelligence archives. Prioritize files on corporate espionage, biotechnology, and all known rivals from the past 20 years. And get me everything there is to know about a human corporation called Neurogen Dynamics." The name came to her from the depths of her memory, a failed hostile takeover from a decade ago, led by an ambitious, amoral human. It was a long shot, a gut feeling. As the AI began its work, Zoria looked at the image of the neurotoxin, the agent of her years of misery. The miracle of her daughter's first steps was now tainted by the ugliness of its cause. The joy of recovery was now twinned with the hunger for retribution. The human doctor had not just brought a cure, he had brought a truth that was sharper and more painful than the disease itself. The hunt began. Zoria Valerius moved with the terrifying efficiency of a collapsing star. She repurposed the Ethelgard Institute's formidable computational resources, turning them from medical research to forensic investigation. The galaxy's best medical facility became the galaxy's most advanced private intelligence agency. Data streams from a dozen star systems were rerouted, encrypted, and analyzed in the Institute's quantum servers. Zoria was in her element. Corporate warfare was a language she spoke fluently. She moved pieces on a galactic chessboard, leveraging financial assets, calling in decades-old favors, and applying pressure with the subtlety of a planetary bombardment. She was no longer just a mother. She was a matriarch defending her bloodline, and the full weight of the Valerius Consortium was a terrifying weapon to behold. Marcus worked alongside her, but his battlefield was molecular. He subjected the neurotoxin to every test imaginable, looking for a signature, a trace element, a manufacturing quirk, anything that could point to its origin. He quickly discovered why it had been untraceable. The protein was designed to degrade into benign, naturally occurring amino acids after a set period, leaving no evidence. The only reason he had been able to find it at all was because his own resonance therapy had inadvertently stabilized a few molecules, preserving them like insects in amber. The cure had revealed the crime. As Zoraya's intelligence network tightened its noose, a primary suspect began to emerge, confirming her initial instinct: Corbin Vance, the CEO of Neurogen Dynamics. Neurogen was a Terran-based corporation that had risen to prominence with a series of revolutionary neural interface technologies. Vance was brilliant, charismatic, and utterly ruthless. A decade ago, he had attempted a hostile takeover of a Valerius-owned subsidiary that specialized in biocircuitry. Zoraya had personally crushed the attempt, financially crippling Neurogen and publicly humiliating Vance. He had vanished from the galactic scene, presumed to have faded into obscurity. But he hadn't. He had rebuilt, operating through shell corporations and proxies, focusing on a new, darker area of research, bespoke bioweaponry. As Zoraya read the file on Vance, a detail caught her eye. 10 years ago, shortly after the failed takeover, Lyra, then a child of 7, had been admitted to a clinic on a remote colony for a minor respiratory ailment. The clinic had been acquired just weeks prior by a shell corporation with a complex ownership structure that, after a dozen layers of obfuscation, led back to Neurogen Dynamics. It was there. The opportunity, the motive, the means. While Zoraya tracked the corporate ghost, Marcus was being haunted by one of his own. The more he learned about Neurogen, the more a cold, familiar dread settled in his gut. He recognized their methodology, the specific way they bypassed ethical constraints, the signature of their reckless ambition. One night, unable to sleep, he pulled up his own private, heavily encrypted files on his data slate. He looked at a photograph of a young man smiling with his own tired eyes. His younger brother, Julian. Julian had been a pilot. 5 years ago, his freighter's systems had malfunctioned during a tricky atmospheric entry. The investigation had blamed pilot error, but Marcus had never believed it. Julian was one of the best. Marcus had spent years digging, convinced something else was at play. He eventually discovered that Julian had been a test subject for a new neural link piloting system, an experimental implant from an up-and-coming company that had promised to revolutionize shipping. The implant had failed catastrophically at a critical moment, causing a seizure that led to the crash and left Julian with permanent, debilitating nerve damage. The company that made the implant had been a subsidiary of a subsidiary, burying its liability so deep it was untouchable. The name of that company was Axon Interlink. As Zoraya's data began to pour in, Marcus ran a cross-reference, and there it was. Axon Interlink was one of Corbin Vance's shell corporations. The air left his lungs. It hadn't been a coincidence that he'd taken Lyra's case. He'd been tracking Neurogen's shadow operations for years, following whispers of their unethical research. When the high-profile Valerius case came up with a mysterious neurological condition, he'd suspected a connection. He had come to the Ethelgard Institute, not just as a doctor, but as a hunter. He hadn't told Zoraya the full truth, fearing she would dismiss him as a conspiracy theorist with a personal vendetta. He found Zoraya on the observation deck, staring out at the void. She didn't look at him as he approached. "We have him," she said, her voice flat. "Corbin Vance. He's on a private station orbiting a rogue planet in the Tartarus Abyss, untouchable by conventional law. It doesn't matter. I have a fleet on its way." "An attack won't be enough," Marcus said, quietly. He'll have contingencies. He'll destroy his research, erase his data. He'll become a martyr, and the crime will never be proven. Zoraya turned to him, her eyes blazing. Then what do you suggest Dr. A, strongly worded letter, I know how he thinks Marcus, said? He projected the image of his brother Julian into the air between them. This was my brother. Neurogen did this to him. They used him as a lab rat for a faulty implant, and then buried him under non-disclosure agreements and corporate lawyers. Zoraya stared at the photo, then back at Marcus, her expression shifting from surprise to a dawning, terrible understanding. You knew. When you came here, you suspected it was them. I suspected their handiwork, Marcus corrected. Vance has a signature. He targets the powerful and the unprotected, alike anyone he can use. He hurt my family for profit. He hurt your family for revenge. The pattern is the same. I've been studying his operations for 5 years. I know his protocols, his firewalls, his escape routes. A fleet will make him run. But you and I, we can make him fall. A new, dangerous alliance was forged in that moment, bonded by shared grief and a common enemy. This was no longer just about justice for Lyra or for Julian. It was about dismantling a monster. Their plan was audacious. Zoraya would use her fleet not to attack, but to create a blockade, cutting off all communication and transport to and from Vance's station, a move she could plausibly deny as a corporate security drill. This would isolate him, make him feel trapped. Meanwhile, Marcus would use his intimate knowledge of Neurogen's network architecture, gleaned from years of obsessive research, to execute a digital assault. He wouldn't be stealing data or crashing systems. He would be doing something far more subtle. He would be using his resonance technology. Vance's entire station, his research, his life's work, is stored on crystalline data servers, Marcus explained, his hands flying across a holographic interface. Like any crystal, they have a resonant frequency. If we can broadcast the right harmonic, we don't destroy the data. We corrupt it. We subtly, irrevocably rewrite it on a quantum level. We turn his greatest weapon, his research, into a mountain of digital gibberish. And how do we get your signal through his military-grade firewalls? Zoraya asked. Marcus smiled a grim, wolfish expression. We don't. We use a ghost in his own machine. He brought up a schematic of the neurotoxin molecule. Vance is arrogant. He would have used his own proprietary biocode as a foundation for the toxin's protein folding sequence. It's his signature. It's also a back door. His own network will recognize the core code as friendly. We will wrap our data corruption signal in the frequency of the very poison he used on your daughter. We will use his crime as the key to unlock his front door. Zoraya stared at him, a newfound respect in her eyes. The quiet, unassuming human doctor was gone. In his place was a man as cunning and as ruthless as she was. He had weaponized his grief, turning his esoteric science into a tool of surgical revenge. Do it, she commanded. As the Valerius fleet moved into position, a silent, deadly armada in the dark, Marcus Thorne sat before his strange musical device. But this time, he wasn't composing a symphony of healing. He was composing a dirge, a single, pure, destructive note that would travel across the void and shatter the world of the man who had hurt both their families. Corbin Vance watched from his fortress station, the crucible amused by Zoraya's fleet. He was untouchable, protected by fail-safes that would erase his work before it could be captured. He never detected the true attack, a subtle resonance signal broadcast from the Ethel Guard. Disguised with the biosignature of his own neurotoxin, the signal slipped past his defenses like a ghost. Marcus Thorne, from light years away, modulated the frequency. It was not a brute force hack, but a surgical strike. Inside the Crucible's crystalline data cores, a dissonant hum began, and Vance's life's work started to dissolve into digital static. As alarms screamed of catastrophic data corruption, a video call opened. It was Zoraya, her face serene. "Trouble in paradise, Vance?" she asked coolly. Behind her stood Marcus. Realization and panic dawned on Vance's face. "You have nothing," he snarled. "My work is gone, but so is your proof," Zoraya smiled. "We didn't want your research. We just needed your confession." An image of Vance's private journal appeared on the screen, detailing his attack on Lyra. "This goes to the authorities in 1 hour. You are finished." The call ended, leaving Vance a king in a castle of ghosts. Weeks later, Zoraya watched from a studio doorway. Soft music played as Lyra, unsteady but determined, took her first clumsy dance steps, guided by Marcus's gentle encouragement. The sight was more precious than any star system, more valuable than any corporate victory. The human doctor hadn't just healed her daughter. He had shown a galactic empress that the greatest power wasn't in wealth or weapons, but in the quiet, stubborn music of hope. So what happens when a mother's limitless fortune meets a human's limitless ingenuity? You get a story of hope found in the most unexpected of places. It's a reminder that the greatest strength doesn't always come from the most advanced technology, but from the simple, stubborn, and often illogical empathy that defines humanity at its very best. It's a testament to the idea that no problem is unsolvable, and that sometimes, to fix what is broken, you don't need a scalpel or a laser. You just need to find the right song to play. If this story of resilience, revenge, and the power of the human spirit resonated with you, please show your support. Hit that like button to let us know you enjoyed it. Share this video with a friend who loves epic sci-fi with a human heart. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell so you won't miss our next story from the far reaches of the galaxy. Thank you for listening.